wonderful to be with all of you. And wow, we're in for a treat. We're in for such a big treat. I get to bring one of my favorite humans on the planet, and get to share this gift of a human with you. And I got to tell you, we just discovered something. We just discovered something together. I think we just started to change a little story right in the presence, and part of you are all part of it. You know, one of my great joys in life is matchmaking. And Michael didn't know that his presence and the way that he carries story and the people he attracts. It was the very, I don't know, it was the second event I went to when I moved to LA, and I met a great love of my life, someone who I was in a relationship with for many years. And we were like, oh, coming together, we could carry more than just the flu. It could bring love too. So may we get to have a great day of sharing love together and story. And I'm going to read a little bit of Michael's bio. You probably know who he is, but in case you don't know the legacy of the human that you are standing before today, let me share some of the goods with you. And whoops, hold on. You got to have the right page to read from. Michael is a renowned storyteller. I'll also just going to share this one thing. When I first saw Michael Meade speak, I'd never seen a storyteller. I mean, it's kind of crazy. I was like in my adult years, I thought storytellers were for kids at librarians. I didn't understand that there was this like way of being in this world that was so innate to humans and like an actual role in society. And I got to see him on the stage at Pioneers, and seeing the way that he was with story evoked and awoke the storyteller within me. So I have so much to owe to this man. I don't think I have told you that either. I'm revealing all my secrets to Michael today. And so he is a renowned storyteller. He's an author and scholar of mythology, anthropology, and psychology. He combines hypnotic storytelling, street savvy perceptiveness, and spellbinding interpretations of ancient myths with a deep knowledge of cross-cultural rituals. He has an unusual ability to distill and synthesize these disciplines, tapping into ancestral sources of wisdom and connecting them to the source stories that we are living today. Is the author of Awakening the Soul, The Genius Myth. If I sat here and like read off all the books that he wrote, we'd be here for half a day. So I'm going to say, do a good Google search and find them, or go to your local library, or even better, your local bookstore. But Michael Meade is the founder of Mosaic Multicultural Foundation, a nonprofit network of artists, activists, and community builders that encourages greater understanding between diverse peoples. He also has a podcast, The Living Myth, which is absolutely wonderful. And he offers many offerings online. So if you are not already entrenched in this world, may this be the beginning of a great, wonderful relationship. I am going to pass over the baton, and so delighted to be with you today, Michael. Oops, hold on, you're muted. Wait. Oh. It's all fun and games
Back
until
to the top.
There we go.
Back to the top. Yeah, welcome everyone. Great to see you, Leah. So as often happens to me, on the way to something, a story pops up. It comes into my mind. And I've learned over time that the story that pops up is the one I should be telling. If I bypass it and tell another story, I usually have like a depression for at least 2 weeks. So in my understanding, the muses are delivering the inspiration. And so this inspiration, when a story comes, is coming from the muses. And I tend now, especially, I follow the muses. So a couple of things came up at once. One is an old saying. It's a Navajo saying where they say the meaning of story is to tell the holy, to tell the holy. It's a beautiful way of saying what story is. And so then the story that came up wasn't a Navajo story, but it's an Apache story that's a neighboring tribe. And so this is a creation story from the Apache people, but they didn't call themselves originally the Apache. They were the Diné, and the Diné translates as the people. So this is one of those occasions which has occurred many times around the earth, where the ancient people call themselves the people. And the meaning of that isn't that they were superior to other people. That wasn't the original sense. The sense was that they were connected to the original people, the first people, the people. And we could now understand that as they have a felt sense of connection to the origins of life. And so they are the people in the sense that they remain connected to the origins of life. And so this is one of the creation stories from Apache or the Dene people. And I'm just going to do it in a short version. But anyway, like a lot of creation stories, it began in utter darkness. As they say, everything was there, but it was hidden behind darkness, or it was hidden in the eternal dark waters of the primordial ocean. And then light came somehow. The Creator separated earth from the heavens, and that allowed the light to come in. And then the Creator, which in this story, it was called simply the one who made the earth. And the one who made the earth did what most creators do, created the earth and the mountains and the rivers and the forests and the birds and the animals. And then eventually at the end came to making people. And so the one who made the earth made the first people and put them on the earth. And of course, they had to be put in a specific spot because that's the only way to be on the earth. And it turned out that the first people didn't like the place where they had been placed. They were uneasy there and they began to complain. So you could say this was the beginning of complaining in the world. And of course, it's still going on all around the world, even as we sit and listen to the story. And at that time, the one who made the earth was still close to the earth. And so that one who made the earth could hear the first humans complaining and said, listen, if you don't like the place where you are, you can pick up and go around and look for a better place. And so that's what they did. And so that was the beginning of wandering on the earth. And of course, people are still wandering on the earth. And eventually those first people came to a place where they settled and they began to dwell, and they felt that they were in the right place because they slept well and were having big dreams, as if to say that's a way to find out where your place is on earth. And so everything was going great. They were having big dreams, they were sleeping well, and all was good. But in this world, things can only remain in that kind of condition for a short while. Inevitably, change happens. And what happened is a few of those first people became sick. And because it was right back at the beginning, no one knew what sickness was. And therefore, of course, they had no idea what healing was. And so the people did not do anything to help those who had become ill. As a matter of fact, what they did was reject them and move away from them. And so those who have become ill were getting more sick every day and were drifting towards the door of death. And no one was doing anything. And then 4 of those first people were concerned about this situation with some people being very sick. And they didn't know what to do, but they went out one night as darkness was falling and driving the light out of the surface of the earth. They went out and they stood in the darkness, each of them facing in a different direction. And they stood there in the darkness, waiting for knowledge to come to them. And sure enough, the one who made the earth, who was still close by because it was early times right after creation, the one who made the earth said to them, you should know this, that on the earth, for every problem, there is a solution. For every illness, there is a cure. For every sickness, there is an antidote. You should know that that is the case here on the earth. And so now 4 of those first people had knowledge. They had knowledge that was knowledge about healing. That is to say, knowledge and healing came into the world at the same time and are deeply connected and remain so until this day. Well, those 4 people, the next night they went out there again, and they each stood facing in a certain direction. And then the one who made the earth spoke to one of them, the one who was facing to the east, and gave that person a song in a rhythm. And the next night when they went out, the one facing to the north received the song. And the next night, the one to the south, and eventually the one to the west, until each of those 4 people had a song, and they had knowledge, and they had rhythm. And then the one who made the earth said to them, now that you have knowledge, now that you have music, now that you have songs and you know something about healing, you need to bring those who are sick to the center of the village and gather everyone. And when you do that, tell them the story of creation in order to bring the potentials of life back again, and sing over them and lay hands upon them and bring everyone together and begin healing them. And so that's what those 4 people did. They went back to the village. They took the people who were sick and they put them in the center, and they gathered all the people around them. And then they told the story of creation the way I'm telling it now. And after telling the story of the beginning, they felt and they found that they were reconnected to the origins of life. And in that occasion of telling the story and therefore tapping into recreation, they sang the songs that they had received directly from the one who made the earth. And they took the knowledge that they had gathered about themselves, about other people, and about healing, and they began to apply it, and everyone became connected and touched each other. And pretty soon, everyone was singing in the middle of the song that had been learned from the one who made the earth. And they say that on those occasions, the ones who were sick became well again. And that was what was called the first healing ceremony. And I would say we are in troubled times now. And what we need is healing ceremonies like that, that can bring those who are ill back into human community. And the ancient people say it is always possible to tap into and be part of and contribute to the recreation of the earth, because creation is not something that simply happened a long time ago. It's something that's going on all the time, moment to moment, throughout nature, but also it can be going on through the human heart and through the human voice. And that's one reason why I'm telling you today the story of the origin of healing rituals. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.
So that's the creation story. Dene people down in Arizona. They're still there. So I should say the old tradition is when you hear a story, you sit with it and then you see what struck you in the story. Because a story is like mythological acupuncture. It'll come and poke you and stick you in a place that's trying to, in your own soul, in your own mind, in your own body, that's trying to get your attention. And so you just sit and see what struck you. And if someone wants to answer a question or something like that, then we can do the old tradition. A story is not finished until it's been spoken about. And so I think that's what we'll go to now. Does that make sense, Leah? Okay.
That's perfect. So, please bring your questions to our chat box, and we'll start calling them out for Michael to feed the story. It sounds like it's a combination of noting where the story that like hit you, like that acupuncture, and what questions are evoked in you.
Yeah. And knowledge comes from framing the right question as much as it does from finding an answer. Questioning is a form of seeking. And this story is about knowledge and seeking and healing and community.
There are many reflections coming in, and here's there are questions that are coming in. Why, and Lorna's asking, why do people get sick in the first place?
It's a good question. In a way, there's no real answer, except what was said in the story. Things can only remain in a full condition for a while. Life has changed. Living on Earth has changed. We're in a period of radical, rapid change right now. And you could also say that everything that comes to life has a shadow. And so sickness or illness is the shadow of being alive. And you could also turn the story and look at it backwards and say, if people hadn't got sick, then other people would not have gone out looking for knowledge, and therefore people would have no knowledge and no capacity to heal, and they wouldn't even have songs. Healing music used to be called the healing road. And so, as I've said to many groups of healers of different kinds, whether it's therapists, psychologists, or body workers, or acupuncturists, or medical doctors, I always say to them, listen, if people stop getting sick, you'd be out of business. So most healers are actually in favor of illness in a kind of philosophical way. So in other words, there cannot be a perfect world. The word perfect comes from the Latin, and it translates as through the form, perfectio, through the form. And to be perfect means to be near death, because you've gone through the form. And so perfection is really not a fully alive state, it's an almost dead state. So many of us have been told that we should be seeking perfection, but that's not really what we should be seeking. We should be seeking knowledge. And wholeness is different than perfection, because wholeness includes the holes. You can only be whole if you include your own holes. And so illness is in the world from the beginning, just as death is in the world from the beginning.
You're making me think of I met someone who got to create with Duke Ellington, and he said, let us not strive for perfection, but let us strive for excellence.
Yeah. And when we excel, the work is to excel oneself, not to excel others. One of the things you learn in creative work like art and music and that things is we're trying to excel ourselves, not excel others. That's the real work, is can we be amplifying the deep self within us, which in each person is genius, is gifted, has something to bring to the world. And that's the work. Another way to say it is each person born is a body wrapped around a story that's trying to unfold into the world from them. Each of us really is one of those four. We're all called to go out and face the darkness. That's what they do to find knowledge. The first step of knowing is not knowing. And we're living in a time of such radical change that we are being called, like the four people in the story, to stand in the place of not knowing, because that's the only place from which we can know more than we already know. I hope that makes sense, because that's the world we live in now. You know, all the idea of, what do they call that in corporations or organizations, the strategic plans. People are still making strategic plans, but they're going out the window as soon as they're made, because of the radical nature of change going on. It's going on in nature and it's going on in culture. So we're living in a dark period, like in the story, they go out in the darkness to learn. And we're living in a period where not knowing is part of the art of being alive right now.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We've got a couple questions coming in. And just to note to the audience, if you haven't caught on, your questions are what is going to be feeding our session today. Michelle is asking, the song is what stands out for me. Can you say more about the personal song and the collective song?
Thank you. Good question. So in the story, sometimes when I'm telling it, I will say it wasn't clear. Was the song coming from them, inside them out, or was coming from outside into them? And then the only thing you could say is yes. So the song, everyone has a personal song. Although when you go back far enough in traditional cultures, there would not be such a severe separation as song from poetry as we have now. The arts were more collected, more related. Now they're seen as very separate. And so there's an old saying, a song is a poem is a prayer is a song. And so everyone has a prayer in them, everyone has a song in them, everyone has a poem in them. We have language that's been written on the interior of our souls, and it wants to come out in some fashion, because to speak is to make, right? In the beginning was the word, they say in the Bible. And in this story, the one who made the earth is speaking directly to the ones who are willing to open their hearts and their minds. And so the song is, I said earlier, the story comes from the muses. Well, the word music comes from the muses. So does museum. Museum means house of the muses. And so the song comes from inside and it comes from outside. It comes from an inspired space. We don't know where that is. We can name it as heaven. We can name it as the other world. And it's also invoking something that's inside each person, an expression that is natural to them, that is usually needed in the world. So that's one way to go about it. And then a collective song often develops from someone receiving or finding a song in themselves. Collective songs are really important. You can, even with popular songs, feel the vitalization that happens when people are singing the same song together. But when you go back into ancient cultures and healing traditions, you find songs that are usually their chants. And when people are chanting that kind of song together, it is a healing vehicle, as what happens in the story. And the song can be aimed at those who are most troubled or most ill at a given time. But in offering one's voice for the healing of others, a person gets their own dose of medicine. And we've done this many times in situations where you need to sing to people. But as you're singing to them, you're getting healing yourself. And so collective songs and collective rituals, like in the story, are part of the essence of human community. And the word community comes from the Latin communitas, which doesn't mean people living near each other. It means something so deep happens, it pulls everyone together, regardless of where they come from and what they believe. They're pulled into the depth of humanity. And what we need now, when we live amongst so many divisions, is communitas, things that pull everybody together. And a song will unite, whereas, intentional words might divide. And people have always been divided. That's, by the way, the first illness in the world, according to this story, is both a sickness and a division. Because as soon as the sickness came, the people who weren't sick turned away from those that were. That is to say, the divisions in our culture are a sickness that needs community to get healed. Just some thoughts.
Just a few arrows of ideas coming out towards us. Thank you, thank you. Heather was really taken by the importance of big dreams, and she was wondering if you could speak more about that.
Yes, thank you. So it's beautiful, right? Many cultures say the world began as a dream. If you think of ancient India, where Vishnu is floating on the eternal ocean and he dreams up the world. And so dreams are related to creation. And then you can also say that everyone dreams. Even science now agrees that if you stop dreaming, you can die, because dreaming is connected to deep REM sleep. And if you're not getting your deep REM sleep, your biology collapses. And so dreaming is keeping everybody alive. So that's just another interesting idea. But then everyone dreams, but a lot of people don't remember their dreams, so they say they're not dreaming, but they just mistake this situation. But dreams come every night. And I'm thinking of a tribe down along the Amazon River in Brazil, where they say, when you go to sleep at night, your soul leaves the sleeping body and goes to the center of the universe. And there it gets a dream and brings it back. But because a person is specific and has exact life experiences, the dream has to be fitted into a shape that can enter the person and be understood. So you dream of someone you went to grade school with, or third grade, you dream of them all of a sudden because something happened between you and them that is now trying to occur to you again, something like that. So when something happens that feels like a big dream, it's usually a dramatic evocation of something about the inner story and the natural aim of a person's life. And so those big dreams can be a guide for a year or many years, or even something to return to decades later. We dream, Carl Jung, the great psychologists would say the dream is an objective view of your inner self. So there's lots of ideas about dreams and lots of ways to study dreams. And the more important thing is to have big dreams, that people are most human when they have big dreams. And strangely enough, we sleep better when we're fulfilling the dream of ourselves. Not necessarily when we have learned how to be quiet or how to avoid trouble, but we are most peaceful in a way and most at one with ourselves when we are living the dream that people used to say brought us to life.
Thank you, Michael. Dorothea has a wild big question for you. The place of knowing is the diving board into fracturing a crystallized paradigm into possibility. And then she asks, what is the function of all within the darkness?
What is the function of?
What is the function of will? Excuse me. What is the function of will within the darkness?
Well, in many ways, you could say that what we would normally think of as will must be surrendered in a dark time like the dark night of the soul, in order that we be open enough to receive the messages from the other world, or the way we're talking about it today, from the one who made the earth. So the old idea is the divine, the eternal, is constantly trying to enter the world and can only enter through the people that are alive at a given time. And the people that are alive have to be like those in the story, not knowing and open in order to receive messages that are trying to come through dreams, but also visions and direct messages and songs and art forms, and will, if it's connected to ego, if it's will in the form of ego drivenness, is strictly in the way. And so oftentimes a person will encounter difficulties in life, what used to be called little death, in order to be open to the next stage of life that's trying to awaken from within, but that's also needing inspiration from outside or from the other world or from the dream or from the divine. So will, which is so highly valued in the Western world, which so highly values itself, is often in the way of meaningful knowledge and change. And right now, the will that has driven the Western world into its attempt to dominate nature and attempt to control life is strictly in the way of change and healing that's trying to happen, because we are really at the end of an era and possibly near the beginning of the next era. And in order to see, like the people standing in the darkness in the story, what's coming next, we have to let go. What's the old statement of St. John of the Cross, who coined the phrase dark night of the soul? And he said something like, in order to go where the soul wants us to go, we have to close our eyes and walk in the dark. And that kind of suggests not being willful or willfully in charge, even of one's own footsteps.
Thank you. Michelle wants to know about outsiders. She says, I'm curious about how the outsiders return to the community together. Is it in the wholeness of the four returning with their song significant, meaning one returning alone isn't enough to heal the community?
Yeah, beautiful question. And like I said, sometimes the knowledge is in the question. The question almost answers itself. The story, the number four isn't that critical. It can be if you're looking at certain symbolic aspects and all, but the idea that we cannot do it alone is a crucial idea. Most of us has grown up in Western modern culture, which where the willfulness, and I would call exaggerated sense of heroicism, has caused a lot of the damage. When I was growing up, I remember we were told that we were, what was the idea? That we were we were rugged individualists. Well, by now we're ragged individualists, and all the individuation without soul and all of the sense of heroics has led us to the place where we are disconnected from nature and we are disconnected from human nature. And so, so the idea becomes turning a different way, and realizing that we may each get our own song. We each have our own calling. Every soul that's born is born with a calling, and the calling is calling to the genius nature in the soul of the person born. Everyone has a calling and everyone has a purpose in life. And that's true for each of those individuals that went out into the dark. But the idea that we could heal the whole village by ourselves, not necessarily the best idea. And the idea that we might need a coterie or contingent of healers working together, that seems helpful. If you want to take it on a psychological level, a Jungian level, you could say all 4 functions of the psyche have to work together. That's another way to take it. I mean, there's always levels. But I'm thinking of the idea that here we are in a world filled with uncertainty, ravaged with natural disasters, earthquakes, floods happening at a more rapid rate, at the same time that culture is in upheaval and conflicted to the point of polarization. And the soul feels all those things, whether we listen to the news or not. And so what do we need? We need to be in touch with our own deep self. We need to be trying to live our story, because that's both safety and protection, as well as dream and fulfillment. But at the same time, we need to be connected to other people who recognize our souls and whose souls we can relate to. I hope that makes sense. There's the idea of friends of the self or friends of the soul. And anybody doing meaningful work, and I'm thinking in the moment of counselors, therapists, and psychologists who are meeting people who are hurting enough that they go looking for help. But if a person doing that kind of work isn't connected to other people doing that kind of work, then a person can be overburdened with the weight of other people's psyches, but also with knowledge. Again, this story is about knowledge. And the thing about knowledge is it has weight. To know something is to take more weight on. And if a person knows things and is not associated with other people who are also knowing things, so that that weight can be shared and there can be discussion and insights into how to carry burdens, like the burdens of pain of other people, the burdens of knowledge of what's happening in the world, then a person can be depressed and pulled into a darkness that is not informative by the weight of their own knowledge. I hope that makes sense. I feel like I have to say that because of the story.
Thank you so much. You just sparked so many thoughts at once. I don't even know which direction to go in, which brings me to a question about directions, because there's several questions that are wondering about the number 4, and they're also wondering about the 4 people. Kay specifically is asking a question about, do the 4 people represent the 4 directions, concepts, and teachings?
So yes, but so the typical thing is to say the 4 directions, and then, north, south, east, west, and then ascribe colors to each and describe certain essential aspects of nature or the world to each, and so on. And those things work. You build things in 4s. And I'll go back to Carl Jung, whose psychology is built on the idea of 4 functions in each person. And it really works. But the really old stories and the old teachings had a 5th thing. And as I do it, I raise my hand, and we each have 5 fingers on each hand. We have 5 toes on each foot. We have 5 senses in the body. We have, 5 openings. Some of them are doubled like ears, but 5 is the quintessence. If the 5th isn't there, the 4 fall apart. So you have the 4 directions and here. And if you don't have here, you have no directions at all. So you could call it the missing 5th, the quintessential element, the secret 5th, it used to be called. And so the 4 is a place of knowledge, but knowledge has levels, and the 5th is necessary to the 4. I hope that makes sense. And I love the idea that we have these 5 fingers and 5 toes and all these fives in us, because all the ancient cultures imagined the world was made of 5 elements, often seen as fire, water, earth, mineral, or stone. And the last one has many different names. I like to call it nature. And so we are symbolically and actually made of the 5 elements that make up the world. And therefore we are body, mind, and soul connected to nature and the cosmos. And that's a helpful thing to know when everything's falling apart. But we cannot use the knowledge of the 4 directions unless we are centered here. And that means both in the place we are and in the place where our self or soul is centering. Just some thoughts about 4s and 5s. And in ancient India and ancient Ireland, the sacred number is 9, 4 plus 5. The 4 and the 5 put together gives you the sacred 9. And so if you go to India and you get mala beads and there's 108 of them, it's 12 times 9. It's the healing number 9 connected to the 12 months of the year, which are really divided into 4. But the same thing exists in Ireland, where 9 is the sacred number, and 4 is the masculine and 5 is the feminine. And when you put them together, you don't get 10 like that, you get 9. Anyway, just playing with the numbers.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. I'm also going to mention to our community that's receiving all of this, your questions. You can also ask questions. Michael's here. You can ask questions about the story, but you can also open to questions about mythology, about story. Just wanted to open that up to all of you. If there's more questions that are in there for you. Ray, we have a couple of different questions about what's living inside of stories. And Joanne is wondering about, if these stories that you're telling contain some kind of treasure, message that they wish to convey. And if this is so, could there be a bigger story that contains all other stories? And what message might it contain?
So, yes, there's treasures inside stories, especially spiritual, soulful treasures. And many stories are about treasures. And they're all about adventures of some kind. So there's an ancient division between spirit and soul. And spirit is connected to things that are rising, and therefore to air and fire. And soul is connected to things that are descending, and therefore water and earth. And the reason I'm saying that is the question about, is there one story that can hold all, is this question about spirit. So as things rise up with spirit, they move towards the oneness. They move towards the universal. And people say, the spirit, the single spirit. And so that's like a spiritual thought and a process of elevation. But the world cannot live simply in elevation. It would then not be earth, it would be heaven. And it would be prior to creation, when everything was one, but it was hidden. So the world as we know it, the living world, is spirit and soul. And so spirit thinks and imagines towards one, universal. Soul thinks and imagines in multiplicity and in diversity and in the many. And so one old description of the living world is the one and the many. And so they both exist. And so certain ways of looking at it, especially religions, will find one story and they'll say, this is the story. And, but really, there are many, many stories, just as there are many, many beings, many, many animals, many kinds of birds, many, many kinds of plants and trees that make up the forest. Diversity is the essence of the forest, and diversity is the essence of human culture as well. And so when you lose the many, you can lose what's called the uniqueness of the soul. And so when you accept the many, the diversity, as being an essential part of creation, then you also wind up including the notion that just as each tree is different from another tree and each bird is different from another bird, each human being is different from every other soul. And so by including the many stories, you include the unique souls and therefore the unique stories of each person who has ever existed. And that's really important, because changing the world and healing the world doesn't start from the outside, it starts from inside, and it rises from the uniqueness of the individual soul, the living out of that story. And then you can't do it by yourself. You need some 3, 4, 200 other friends. But what we each have to contribute is a uniqueness that entered the world with us. And so in order to be part of the living world, we need the many, many stories. And yet at another level, they're all connected to the original story, which is a creation story. But as soon as you start creation, you have the many. So it's a really good question, but to me, it's about spirit and soul, and which are secretly connected. So let me say one more thing for the mystics in the audience. So the mystical connection is not giving up all sense of self to be connected to the oneness. It's actually different. It's finding the uniqueness of one's own soul, and then the connection to the oneness happens automatically. We're here to become ourselves. We're here to become a lived version of the story embedded within us. And the more fully we do that, the more we find ourselves connected to the origins, to creation, and to the oneness and the universal. That's a mystical idea. I'm voting for that idea.
I'll vote with you. We can go to the polls on that one.
I think we are going for the polls
I think we are going
on
for
the
the
legitimacy of the many opposed to the one who thinks they are the one. I think that's up for a vote.
I think it is. Ray and Sandy are working with a similar theme around knowledge and understanding. And Sandy specifically asked, what classifies as knowledge? Is it an inner knowing, or is it information? And she's supposing that it's inner and outer, but I see knowledge as being used as a weapon sometimes. And it can be challenging to talk of intuition or inner knowing to some.
So one of the old, lots of the old thinkings and imaginings are threes, like heaven, earth, and the underworld. And so one of the first divisions is the division in three, triple goddess. A story is beginning, middle, end. Three is a good way to consider something. And so when it comes to knowledge, you have information as the superficial level, knowledge as a deeper level, and then wisdom. And I agree with the idea that knowledge, well, first of all, information is being used as weapons, but so is knowledge at times. And so what's missing usually is wisdom. And wisdom is an interesting thing because it's not simply about light. The ancient Greek word for wisdom translates as dark knowledge. Wisdom means a knowledge of the light and a knowledge of the darkness. Like in the story, when the healers have to know where the knowledge and the wisdom comes from, but also they have to know that there's illness in the world. And so when knowledge is not deep enough to heal, typically, it needs to actually get connected to wisdom. And of course, now we're living in the age of information, not even knowledge. And we're living in the age of an excess of information, of a kind of massive amount of data. And you can never make a whole, no matter how much data you have. Data can never add up to wholeness. It's always adding more difference rather than more wholeness. And wholeness is more connected to wisdom than, I would say, to knowledge. Knowledge is really important, but knowledge that becomes lived knowledge and therefore becomes wise is really what's missing. And so I don't know, I hope that's helpful with that. In the story, it said they were getting knowledge, but they also were getting wisdom, which said that now that you have knowledge, go heal those who are ill. So the story says that knowledge and healing go together, and that real knowledge would become wisdom, which we be not divisive but inclusive. Growing up in the Western world and still living in the Western tradition, what we are living with is the subject-object split, which then becomes the mind-body split, which then becomes a division between human culture and nature, where the division that we're dealing with in terms of politics and broken community goes all the way back to the separation of subject from object. I just did a podcast recently on the old idea that the way to understand the world was three things: spirit, body, and soul, or mind, matter, and soul. And soul was in the middle. Soul is keeping spirit connected to matter. It's keeping mind connected to body. And what's happened is soul has been lost. And you can trace it back to the fourth council of the Christian church in 869 AD. They made a literal decision to take soul out of the occasion and the equation. Up until then, the Christian church was using the tripartite view of the world, which said the world was made of spirit, matter, and soul. And because soul is multiple and diverse, and you can't control it, and you can't tell it what to do, they decided to take it out of the occasion. And then that later becomes the underpinning for the subject-object division, which is like dividing the atom and then wondering where the bombs came from. And so we're living in a division that started a long time ago. And wisdom would tell us to find as much healing. The word healing means make whole. As much healing as possible, personally, collectively. And when the world is falling apart, it's secretly calling for healing and finding a way back to wholeness. And so we are here, I think, to answer that call, each in our own way, not to take it on heroically, but to find that kind of medicine that we can bring. And the old understanding is everybody has medicine in them from the beginning. When we find our calling, when we find our art, when we find our gifts, we then become a medicine person. We have something to bring that not only heals us in giving, but it heals others who can receive it and benefit from it.
Okay, now that we're nearing the end of our time, the questions are flooding in. I don't know how to choose. But we're going to go to Karianas, who's asking about the role of new stories and songs along with ancient ones. And she's saying, can you speak to the call or need for new stories and songs being caught to help us get through the times we are in, to help us shift into a new era? And in contrast, the role of ancient stories and the balance between them.
Thank you. So in the Western world, we're educated to seek what is new, because new is better. But it's not true, of course. Wholeness is the uniting of the ancient with the immediate. The old definition for the soul is it is ancient and immediate at the same time. So we have been educated, I think, certainly I was, to think that the new is a new thing. But the new always comes from the old thing. That's what the story's about. We don't need simply new stories. I always run into people saying, don't we have to make a new myth? And I always say, give it a try. You can't make a myth. We are made of myths, but we can't make a myth. So the notion is to find the new perspective in the old archetypal material. I hope that makes sense, because new is the advertisement of materialistic culture that pretends that something is brand new and that all the brands are new. But really, wisdom and knowledge is about connecting the ancient with the immediate. And in story terms, it's connecting the beginning with the end. What's the old statement? Many important and potentially great projects have been lost because people couldn't put the end and the beginning together. We're living at the end of an era. We're being called to find the beginnings of the next vision of the world. And it's not completely new. It's actually, so this story that I told was told every time people got sick. was told every time people felt lost, was told every time people got opposed to each other, because the idea was to go back to the beginning, tap the primordial, touch the origins, touch the original potentials, and those potentials will become the new thing coming from the old. I hope I'm making sense, because if you think about songs, it's really hard to create a new sound. The new song is usually the old tunes and tones mixed with a couple of different words and coming out in a form that makes sense right now. But art, creativity, imagination is born of ancient things, which in depth psychology they call the archetypal, the arche, the original shapes, which exist inside people. And so, yeah, you know, every generation needs a whole new bunch of new love songs. I've been old enough to notice that, you know, and new styles. But the new is always coming from the old. When you learn music, you learn the essences and the fundamentals, and you realize, oh, they're being recombined. And they awaken inside a person. Each person has their own gift and their own way of adding to creation. But creation is not something that happened just back there. It's ongoing all the time. Creation is the underlying archetype of the earth. And so just as a forest has new leaves, but it's coming from the same earth that grew the forest thousand, you know, so on and so forth. So part of being alive now, I think, is trying to find a way to help pronounce and invoke the ancient and the immediate and reconnect them. And then from that, visions of another world develop. That's my sense.
Thank you. And Zoe has several questions about this process of creating song and is asking for any guidance you might offer about writing or healing songs as differentiated from the healing in any song one writes and sings. I think of the distinction between writing with the intention to heal versus the healing that inherently can happen.
So right now I'm thinking of Native traditions and Native people that I've worked with and singers. And they come up with new songs all the time, but they don't try to do it. They don't try. I'm a little leery of intending healing. I'm just a little leery of it because it starts to get the willfulness in there. And so in a way, every song is a healing song if the heart is in it. But I also think that, all right, so I was on a panel once at some event, and it was a panel about, everyone on the panel was an artist. And there were like 7, 8 or 9 people. And hearing the conversation when we started, I asked if I could speak last. And I did that because I was afraid that, anyway, I did it. So then everybody spoke, and they were really, you know, filmmaker, artist, poet, painter, sculptor, but everybody spoke about my art and my work. And a lot of the questions were about that. And I was waiting at the end I was waiting for someone to say, this doesn't come from me, it comes through me. I was waiting for someone to say, I feel so grateful because I get to make music, and I get to make music because the muses decide to send it to me and through me. And no one said it. And I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying education went that way. And at the end, I felt I was there at the end to say, listen, I want to honor the muses and everyone that they visit. So I think that essence is really important. You know, music is an industry now. That's like an impossible idea. Music is the healing road, and it opens and things come through us. And when we operate that way, we don't have to worry about intentions, and we don't have to worry about correctness. Anyway, that's what I think mostly about it. Wisdom, beauty, meaning, healing is trying to enter the world all the time. And most of it can only enter through the people living at that time. And it can only enter through the living people if they're open the way those 4 in the story were, and allow the one who made the earth, or the muses, the spirits, the ancestors, whatever you want to call the source, allow them that to manifest through us. And it enters us, and then it can't help but mix with our story. our trauma, our healing, the kind of thing that we are made of, and that makes it new and different because it came through us. But it is the same old, ancient, primordial inspiration of creation entering the world through those who happen to accept it at a given time. And we wind up being vessels for recreation. That's how I imagine it.
Thank you, Michael. You're making me think of that David Bowie quote where he said, I just put up my antenna, and again, it all comes down.
Yeah, yeah, that's a
This is
good
our,
one.
yeah. This is our last question today, and it comes from Sarah. And she's asking, what historical myth comes to mind to you that might represent what the world is going through right now?
Okay. I have a ready answer for that, and it's a very minimal story that I'll tell quickly. Another Native American story known by a number of different tribes, so it's found in different parts of what we call North America. And in the story doesn't begin with in the beginning or once upon a time. The story says knowledge is so important that people are looking for it all the time. And people are driving on highways and byways and back roads 24 hours, day and night, looking for that which they're missing, which is knowledge often. And most people don't know that the knowledge they're looking for can be found in a cave. And the cave is not far away. And if you found that cave and looked into the cave, what you would see is an old woman in the cave weaving the most beautiful garment that anyone has ever seen. And she'd been weaving it for a long time. And she's at the point of finishing the hem of the garment, and she wants it to be beautiful. And so she's making it out of porcupine quills. And in order to weave the quills into the hem of the garment, she has to bite down on the quills. And she's been biting down on porcupine quills for so long, she's worn her teeth down to nothing but nubs above the gums, but still she keeps biting on the quills and weaving the garment. And every once in a while, she has to stop and go to the back of the cave. And in the back of the cave, there's a fire that some people say is the oldest thing in the world. And hanging over that fire is a cauldron. And in the cauldron are all the seeds of all the grains and all the plants and all the trees and all the fruits. And if she doesn't go back and stir that stew of grains, then the fire will burn the grains and we won't have forests and we won't have food and we won't have vegetative life. And so the old woman, tired from all the weaving, gets up and slowly moves to the back of the cave in order to stir the cauldron of seeds. And as she does so, the black dog, what black dog? The black dog comes over to where she's laid the beautiful garment on the floor of the cave, and seeing a loose thread, the black dog begins to pull on the thread until it has unraveled the entire garment that is the most beautiful garment that anyone had ever seen. And when the old woman comes back from stirring the soup of existence, she sees before her not the beautiful garment, but she sees a chaotic mess and pile of confusion. And she's stunned for a moment. And then she sits down. It doesn't say for how long she sits, but as she's sitting down in front of the chaos that has come from what was beauty, she sees a loose thread. And she picks up the loose thread. And as soon as she does that, she sees an even more beautiful garment than the one she had been weaving before. And she begins to weave again. And it's important to know that that old woman is the old woman who weaves the world, the one who wove the world at the beginning, the one who we were earlier calling the one who made the earth. And so we're living in a time when the garment of the world unravels. We're living in a time when the black dog pulls everything apart. And the ancient people said, don't be so angry at the black dog, because if that old woman had ever finished a garment, it would have been beautiful and maybe perfect, and it would have been the end of the world. Be thankful for the chaos you encounter, and just remember to pick up the thread that's calling to you, and then join all the others who want to heal and make beauty, and join the old woman and start reweaving the world again. That's the story I think of all the time.
I live with that story in my back pocket. I remember receiving it many times, and I call on it almost daily.
Yeah.
And I'll echo Ray's words, who says, the sound of your voice, Michael, makes it so much easier to breathe.
Thank you. And we're thankful to live in the Black Dog times. And we have no choice. We're living in the Black Dog times. And we're here to be witnesses to the chaos and agents of the reweaving. That's one way to look at it. If we turn away from it, we're turning away from those that are sick. We're turning away from the chaos that's waiting to become the next vision. And so we have to trust that we pick up the right thread. It's called the thread of genius, the thread of dreams, the thread of the story trying to live through us. And if we do that, we're contributing to the new vision, to the new weaving, to the recreation of the world. According to myth, and me, I'm sticking with the myths because they've lasted longer than anything else.
Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, Michael. I'm going to put the link to Michael's website right here, Mosaic Voices, right there. He has many, many books, and I'm just going to keep putting it so people can collect it. And we'll also send it out to everybody. You also do 2-hour classes. You're often doing these lectures that are so accessible and easy to find and make part of your everyday life for sanity and weaving in the ancient with the new. And I'm just going to ask everyone, perhaps you want to just anchor in one thing that you received today or how you're feeling and place onto our chat box and nourish and feed our collective, because it helps our collective memory. There are so many things, so many ideas, so many things to wonder about that were evoked. And so I invite you to place that in there. Michael, is there anything else that you want us to know about or ways that we can play with you continuously? You're going to start doing events again.
There's many things on the website. There's a Living Myth podcast, which is a free podcast on myth and imagination every week. And we're just about to start a new a workshop actually called The Soul's Great Adventure. The Soul's Great Adventure. In other words, we're living in the hard times or living in the dark times, but from the soul's point of view, we're living in the time of the great adventure of the soul waking in a more full way and bringing us into the world in ways that are more meaningful, more creative, and more healing. So if that's of interest, that's coming up. It might be pretty soon. It's hard for me to know because I'm always lost in a story.
You must have a good team that tracks time for you. For those of you who are tracking time, I'll just mention in an hour from now, we're going to have one more free class called Manage Energy, Thinking and the Creative Mind. This is with an elder teacher, Dina Fraboni, who's been truly a master of this. And, you know, as storytellers, we are weaving energy in space and time. And this is one of the great skills to really be able to understand your relationship to that, and also how to clear out the energy that could be in the way that's blocking you in your relationship with the muse. So that's going to be a wonderful class. And then I'll just also mention that tomorrow we have a couple more things, but what I really want to put on your radar is a very special conversation called How Prophecy and the Origin Story Inform the Present Moment. You know, so we've got ourselves a theme over here, and that's going to be with Jyoti Ma and Luisha. Oh gosh, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Anyway, we'll have all that too, but just so you know, more goodies are coming. And Michael, thank you so much for your time,
Thank you.
your dedication, and your generosity and your caring of these old stories. It's the Aboriginal saying, I believe, that says the old stories must be carried into the present for the future to exist. And thank you for making that possible for us.
Thank you. Thank you for your good work, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. I invite everyone to take yourselves off mute and send huge blessings and grace and send this good man.
Namaste, new moon blessings. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Deep gratitude.
Thank you so much.
Vielen Dank, Germany.
All right.
Love you.
Thank
Thank you.
Mahalo.
It was amazing. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael.